Without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. We here at Lure are welcoming Sarah Donnellan, a residential real estate attorney here in Chicago. She runs her own practice, so it's really great to have a very different look than what we've had the last couple of weeks with super humongous firms and attorneys working at those firms. We get the total opposite side here with residential running your own practice. So I think this will be a really great and informative meeting for anyone who's looking to get into residential real estate. And I'll let you take it away, Sarah.
Okay. Well, hi, everyone. So as was just mentioned, my name is Sarah Donnellan. I do have my own firm, Praedium Law Group. When it first started, it consisted of little old me. And then moving forward, we've now kind of gotten to a point where there is an assistant who does a lot of administrative work. And then we do have an of-counsel attorney who fills in as needed for closing coverage and, small things of that nature. But for the most part, I would say 90% of it I still handle and I'm very on hands with. Just a little bit kind of about my background. So I actually got my broker's license in 2010. So I did full-time sales and leasing for about 3.5, 4 years maybe, and then decided to go back and pursue my law degree. So while I was in law school, I was a part-time law student, and then I was still doing real estate to kind of supplement my income and make it through law school without accruing too much debt. So once I graduated, I did end up working for a medium-sized firm in the Loop. They mostly handled foreclosure work, but I really held up their residential real estate department within the firm. So I had an assistant, I had a law clerk, I had another attorney who worked for me, and I really enjoyed the experience of working for a mid-sized firm, but when it came to things that were important to me and how I would run a firm, there were certain things when it comes to residential real estate that we'll get into in a little bit that I was just found myself at odds with the managing partner. A lot of it, to be honest with you, comes down to client care. So for those of you interested in residential real estate, I will be very honest with you in that it is slightly different from other practice areas, and you have to keep in mind I don't want to exaggerate it, but it is an intimate thing. Residential real estate, when it comes to people's homes, when it comes to where they're going to live with their families, there are, of course, two pieces to it. There's the residential real estate side of things where, you just have investors where it is just business for them. It's cut and dry. It's to the point. There's no emotions. Those transactions are pretty straightforward. It's when you get into the nuanced, the little old couple selling their home to move into a nursing home, the young family that's moving from the city to the suburbs. That piece of this particular practice area you have to be aware of. And so again, when I was with the mid-sized firm, that part of it for me wasn't exactly there. They really looked at a file for what it was, that it was just a file, that, this is the process, this is how we handle files, and we don't stray from that. Where my feeling on it is, especially coming from the leasing and sales side of it, is there's so much more to it than that. So that unfortunately, as much as I am a big proponent of processes and the way to run a file, residential real estate does have uniqueness to it that you have to be aware of if you're going to succeed in doing this practice area.
When you say that, do you mean just like the emotion of like a homeowner type thing, or what sorts of things do you have to deal with in this circumstance?
And I can only speak to residential real estate because it's all I've done. So my firm, whereas other firms branch out, they'll do family law, they'll do estates and trusts. My firm is solely residential real estate. So I can only speak to it when it comes to this specific practice area. The client care and the relationships you have with all of the people in the transaction are super, super important. Where I don't know if that's necessarily the case in other practice areas. But when you do have a standard residential real estate transaction, likely you will have a seller's attorney, a buyer's agent, a listing agent, the buyers, the sellers, the title company, the lender. There's a lot. I mean, I think for any one transaction, you know, I could be dealing with 8 to 10 different people, all to make that transaction come together. So with that being said, you have to have some good bedside manner in order to get these transactions accomplished. You know, there's a very big difference between transactional real estate attorneys or any transactional attorney and litigators. And I've come across them. I have very good friends that are litigation attorneys, and they, you know, try and dip their toes into the transactional world, and it's a little bit different. The client care and the customer service really is a big part of this practice area, where when you're litigating, that's not always the case, if that is a polite way to put it.
Do you have any sort of core tenets you try to follow for how to deal with customers, since you're not really dealing with adversaries like you might in litigation? Do you kind of have like I don't want to call it a checklist, but a sort of core principle that you try to follow?
Yep. So, and it's funny you bring up, you know, in transactional real estate work, you know, we don't have opposing counsel. Like I don't consider, you know, if I'm the seller's attorney, I don't consider the buyer's attorney my opposition. How I go into transactions is, you know, the buyer wants to buy and the seller wants to sell. And, you know, at the end of the day, while we have our specific client and we want to protect their interests, you know, really I try not to make it adversarial unless it's absolutely necessary. And believe me, there have been times where it's absolutely necessary, that, you know, I don't want my client to be wronged, and it does get a little heated. But for the most part, and that's kind of where this practice area I think is a little bit unique, there is no opposition, so to speak, unless it gets to that point. We're here for a common goal. And I think that's really important. I have come across other attorneys in the past who maybe, you know, aren't necessarily transactional attorneys, but they're doing it as a favor for a friend or whatever the case may be. And they're used to the litigator mindset. You're the opposition. You know, I'm here to fiercely advocate for my client. And, you know, a lot of times delivery of a message is everything. So where they come in kind of guns blazing, transactional work is a little more, okay, you know, yes, we want to protect our clients, but there's a common goal here. You know, and in my way of doing things, I guess, if we're talking about core tenets here, mine really is transparency. I do like to be, you know, without risking my client's position on a matter, or risking, you know, the fact that I am there to represent them. One of my big things is transparency with everybody in the transaction. So, you know, if I'm a buyer's attorney and I know that there's something going on with the financing, of course, I'm not going to fully disclose, you know, every single thing about why the financing is having a hiccup at that particular time. But for me, communicating that to the other side and setting realistic expectations. Listen, my client just needs a week to figure this out. You know, I have it from the lender that we are going to close. Communication and transparency in the beginning can go a long way to the end, versus well, I'm just not going to tell the other side and hope that it works itself out. And, if we have issues on closing day, I'll deal with that later. I don't like to run my practice that way. And I think a lot of other transactional attorneys would agree with me on that again, we're not trying to hide things. We're not trying to, we're really trying to make it to the closing table, protect the clients on both sides, and there is a common goal here, which I happen to really like about transactional work, which is different than other practice areas.
When you're dealing with clients, is the process super similar every time? It's probably a little bit more cookie cutter on the residential side, but how do you actually approach a particular transaction? Is it different for every person, at least at the start?
So, there's, in terms of the administrative part of it, there is a very strict way that we handle the file when it comes in. There's a very particular way that when a realtor sends me a contract, here's the process that it goes through. Here's when title is ordered. Here's when the survey is ordered. Here's when the water certificate and the zoning certificate, there's we don't stray from that. And the reason we don't stray from that is because there's so many moving pieces to a transaction that if one thing gets missed or something doesn't get ordered on time, it affects everybody. Now, in terms of dealing with the client themselves, I try and tailor it and make it unique to the client and the realtor. So the realtors that I get business from, they all handle their businesses differently. And where I have seen firsthand other residential real estate attorneys, they just handle all of their realtors the same. It doesn't matter if they get a client from realtor A and realtor B, that file is being handled the same. I know from experience that doesn't always necessarily work. That realtor A may have a very different way they approach files than realtor B. Some of my realtors, once they get the contract executed, they step out completely. They are like, okay, it's an attorney review. That's on you, attorney. Let me know when closing is scheduled, which is fine. There is nothing wrong with that if that's how that realtor chooses to handle their business. I have other realtors who want to be copied on everything, want me to call them twice a week to give them updates, want to immediately know if there's an issue, we adapt. And my assistant knows, if a realtor is calling and if it's a particular realtor, I need to get that message right away. I need to either calm them down or talk them through it. And same goes for the clients. If it's a client we've worked with in the past and I just know this is how they function because maybe they're a doctor and they can only answer emails from 6 a.m. to 8 a.m. on Tuesday mornings, then we're going to make ourselves available. That is the one thing about residential real estate that I know attorneys struggle with. Unfortunately, realtors are out on the weekends and they're showing properties, and lenders are working on the weekends, and lenders are working until 8, 9 o'clock at night. And unfortunately, as much as I would love for this to be a 9-to-5 job, it's not. When you're a solo practitioner, and especially in residential real estate, I do try and sit down with my realtors and in the beginning set the expectation. These are the hours I'm available. These are the hours my assistant is available. Should you need something, text me. And if it's a Saturday afternoon, I'll get to it as soon as possible. I just had I love this realtor, but she texted me at 5 o'clock on Saturday, and she's like, we really want to put in an offer, but we can't figure out why these property taxes are so high. Can you please look into this for me as soon as possible? Because it's going to be a multiple offer situation. We need to get this contract written. Yes, is it not ideal that I had to stop what I was doing on a Saturday afternoon to pull it up really quickly? No, but that's the kind of support she needs from me, and that's the kind of client care and support that I want to give to my clients and realtors. So it is a very unique, one size does not fit all when it comes to dealing with realtors, lenders, title companies, and the clients themselves.
Because of that, the nature of all the people you're dealing with, how have you approached running your own firm in this environment? I know you just hired someone in the past year, which is great. So is your longer, this is kind of a multiple part question, but is your longer term goal like having more folks on your firm? Do you want to try and keep it small and so you don't lose that sort of intimacy that you mentioned before?
Yep.
What's your approach in running your own firm?
So it's funny you bring this up, because this past week I was kind of thinking, we're at the end of the year. So of course, business planning for 2021, what is the picture look like for my firm in particular? I would love to expand the firm. I would love to bring on an attorney that does handle estates and trusts, because that is such a big component of what my clients need. A lot of times they're buying properties, or the mom co-signs for the daughter, and then they have to figure out how they're going to hold title and where's the property going to go. And it's so, as much as I want to expand, and I do see that for the firm, because I think we're at that point, it took me, even my of counsel attorney, Daniel Hernandez, I've known him since law school. He's a very good friend of mine. It took a lot of meetings in the beginning to really make sure we were aligned on how we wanted to handle our relationship and business. So yes, as much as I would like to expand, it's going to be a very slow process in trying to find very like-minded attorneys who are professional, can get the job done, but understand that there is a very human component to residential real estate, and even the estate planning that goes along with that. We all have to be on the same page. I'll never sacrifice what I've built over the past 3 years, just to expand. It's got to be the right time. It's got to be the right person that fits, I guess, the culture of what I want. When people refer their friends or family to my firm, I want to continue, no matter how big we get, the same, I guess, boutique experience of, you're not going through a commercial huge law firm. There's not like 5 managing partners and like 15 associates. I always, and this is, again, I understand it. I know a lot of attorneys, especially in the residential real estate world, where the file comes in, their assistant or paralegal handles the entire file, and then they show up at the closing with really no knowledge or what has gone on for the past 45 to 60 days while we're waiting for financing. I always tell my realtors, yes, my assistant is here, but I communicate with her. I communicate with her. Everybody else communicates with me. Your clients and the realtors are hiring an attorney, and they should be able to pick up the phone and know that they can reach me, and that they don't have to go through my assistant and wait 2 days to get a phone call back. They're hiring me for a reason. And so even though some days it's more difficult than others, that they have my direct line, that they have my cell phone, and that they can constantly call me. And I don't ever want to lose that. Even if the firm gets bigger, I don't ever want to not know what's going on with the file, or have a client that says, yeah, it was super weird. We hired an attorney, but like I didn't see her or talk to her until closing day. That is absolutely not the culture I want, no matter how big we get. So we'll see how that plays out.
Absolutely will. Now, how did you actually go about building your actual business? How do you get new clients? You mentioned referrals. When you were just starting out, I'm sure you probably had some business ready to go, but I'm sure a lot of this has been built um, over these past few years. So how does that look like?
So I was very fortunate in the fact that I had already kind of built a name for myself in residential real estate in Chicago by being a broker. So, I had worked at Coldwell Banker. I had held my license at Compass when they first came to Chicago, in Lincoln Park and the Gold Coast. So bigger offices. And again, I'm very, very lucky, and I continue to be very lucky that the managing brokers and the people I met in those first few years just doing sales as a broker, once I got, licensed as an attorney, I was very fortunate that they opened up their offices to me and said, hey, if you want to come and talk to my realtors about property taxes, or if you want to come and talk to my realtors about the new 7.0 contract that just came out, I was very fortunate that they gave me those opportunities. And I built business that way, by, having strong connections to realtors, to managing brokers, and to lenders prior to starting out. Now, that is not to say that it cannot be done any other way. I know quite a few solo practitioners in the residential real estate world who literally had no connections to real estate walking out of law school. And a big part of residential real estate in Chicago is, for as big of a city as this is, there are certain subsects and communities that are very, very small, meaning you slight or piss off the wrong realtor, and that has a big trickle effect in residential real estate here in Chicago. And same is true with some of the heavy hitters in the residential real estate world. For as big of a city as this is, you would be surprised at how many times you come across the same realtor or the same attorney on the other side. So, a good way for me to have grown business is to keep the relationships I have as professional and non-adversarial, I guess, going back to that, as possible. The way you grow business in residential real estate is to keep your realtors happy, keep the lenders happy, and really be someone that if a realtor refers you, that the other attorney, when they look at the file, isn't going to go, oh, it's her again. Oh my God, she was such a pain on the last file. Because you just continue to see the same names over and over and over again. So in terms of growing business, it's very important to keep that in mind, that there is a very good chance that the realtor or other attorney or lender you're working with on a file today, 2 months from now, could show up on another file. And word travels quickly. And if things go bad, it's all in how you handle that. And, again, a big part of it is keeping realtors. I think the thing that I hear most from realtors is communication. I have built my business because I do assure my clients and my realtors, at any time you can pick up the phone and I will respond. Even if I can't, prime example, I get emails all the time that are 4 paragraphs long after an inspection has just completed and it is a complete meltdown, and I get a War and Peace novel in an email in the middle of dealing with another closing. I always, if I look at it and I see it, I will respond with a quick acknowledgement. Hey, receive this in a closing. We'll respond later tonight. That goes a long way. Realtors have told me time and time again that just that quick acknowledgement goes a long way with them and the clients. So again, going back to growing business, if you treat one realtor really, really well, I can guarantee you that that will spread through the real estate community, and they will say, hey, you know, I used Sarah on this last transaction and she was really great. You may want to reach out to her and see if it would be a good fit. Word of mouth is huge when it comes to this practice area.
And then how much did your previous experience as a licensed broker and in leasing, how much of that translated, aside from the connections you mentioned earlier, to when you actually switched over to law?
To be honest with you, it gave me an excellent perspective as to all of the work that goes into that client before the attorney even gets on board. So I know firsthand what my realtors go through because I was one for several years. So I think what gets lost in translation, if you're not familiar with, you know, that whole process of when you first get a buyer or you first get a listing and you go through all these showings. And I think what attorneys sometimes forget is all of the work that led up to that executed contract. And that's what I've always told my realtors is I respect what you guys do before the contract is even executed, because I remember what that was like. And I remember how hard those days were sometimes. So, you know, a big piece of how that helped me now is that I do have a broader perspective of the entire transaction. I think sometimes residential real estate attorneys, especially, they get honed in on, okay, here's the executed contract. It's a contract, and now I'm going to deal with it. Versus, okay, you know, realtor, give me the backstory on this client. What's it been like on their showings? What are they like? What's their situation? Anything I need to know about? And that I think goes a long way. I love when my realtors send me an email and they're like, hey, I just want to give you information on this client. This is the 4th time we've been under contract. This is the 1st time we've gotten to attorney review. Everything else is falling apart. Like, it's good for me to know that information, where I think other attorneys would just be like, okay, I don't care. Why are you telling me this? I did see in the chat, did somebody have a question?
Yeah, Rodrigo left one. He had to go to class, but he
Sure.
asked, what are some of the major obstacles that you had to overcome due to the current pandemic, which I'm sure there's many.
Oh, gosh. Here's what I will say. You know, the pandemic has been hard. I will say that the pandemic probably pushed the real estate industry in the direction that it's needed to go for a really long time. I think pre-COVID, we were doing things in a slightly archaic, old-fashioned kind of way. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. COVID really pushed us to move into the next chapter of, okay, the buyer and seller closing in different locations, the seller pre-signing beforehand. Virtual notaries have now become a huge thing, which just continues to blow my mind. But again, Guaranteed Rate, who is one of the bigger lenders in Chicago, they pre-COVID had been rolling out this product that was called a flash closing. So essentially, you know, if you represented a buyer, you get to the closing table and there would be, you know, the loan package could be close to 120, 140 pages that you would sit there and you would go page by page with the client. These flash closings now, Guaranteed Rate has offered and has streamlined since the pandemic, gets that package down to, there's maybe only 15 to 20 pages that have to be actually signed, which is great because prior to closing, I can pick up the phone or Zoom or FaceTime with a client and say, here's your entire loan package. It's 120 pages. Let's go through it now so that when you go to the closing table tomorrow, you have 15 pages to sign, you're in, you're out, and you're done. And closings are taking 20 minutes now, where they used to take 2.5 hours. With that being said, for a long time, we were accustomed to getting to a closing. You'd be at the title company. There'd be the closer for the title company, the buyer's attorney, the buyers, sometimes the buyer's realtor, sometimes the lender would even show up with a closing gift, the seller's attorney, seller may or may not pre-sign. You would have 6 to 8 people in the room. And to a certain extent, when problems would arise the day of closing, like, for example, a final walkthrough issue. If the buyer got to the property the morning before closing and there were issues, we would get to the closing and the buyer would let me know. I'd pull the seller's attorney out of the room. I'd say, listen, call your client. We got to figure this out. We'd figure it out. Now it's, okay, morning of closing, buyer's realtor emails me. I get the email. I have to email or call the seller's attorney. Seller's attorney has to present that to their client. Then it has to come back to me to go back to the buyers. Yes, was it much easier to just pull the attorney out of the room and say, listen, how are we going to fix this? Versus the 18 steps that it takes now? Yes, but we're adapting to that. We're changing the way we do things. We're saying, the final walkthrough should occur, maybe a couple hours before closing to allow us time to address any issues. So we're not sitting at the closing table trying to deal with all these last minute issues. We've just modified our timeline to account for the delay in communication, which, unfortunately happens. I would say it's pushed us in a direction of streamlining certain things, but now we're trying to just figure out communication wise how we navigate through the last minute issues on closing day, which, believe me, were a lot easier to deal with when everybody was in the same room.
So both more efficient and less efficient at the same time. This is what it sounds like.
Correct. Yes, that's a great way to put it.
Alrighty. I have some other questions here, and if anyone else has questions, feel free to jump in. But one common question we always have is, what advice do you have for current law students who are interested in real estate law?
Okay.
What should they be doing now, if anything, to hopefully prepare for that career, if it is something that they actually want to do?
Sure. So if it is something that they want to pursue, I would say, try and find, an attorney. It could be a mid-size attorney, a solo practitioner, find someone that's kind of willing to give back and will allow you to shadow them on certain files. I have done that in the past. I have a completely separate email address with the law firm. If a potential law student that wants to get into this profession, if they ever say, hey, I'd love to just follow the file from start to finish to see all of the components, I will ask the client and the realtor and everybody in the transaction if it's okay, if they don't mind if this other person is copied on correspondence, just so they can kind of get a feel for what it's like to see a transaction from start to finish. I would say learn as much as you can about property taxes in Cook County. They, for residential real estate purposes, they are probably one of the biggest things that realtors, other attorneys, and clients are confused by. So if you can become an expert in how property taxes work and exemptions and certificates of redemption and certificates of error, if you can understand that piece of it, it will set you apart from a lot of other attorneys. I know a lot of residential real estate attorneys that still miss the mark slightly on how things work. And so if you can know that piece really well, it will let you shine. So I would say, again, if it's something that you're interested in doing, start learning the ins and outs of a transaction, not just I went to John Marshall. I did take the real estate, like the basic level class. There's a lot of very good information, but then there's also a lot of information that I think is missed in law courses for real estate. So again, I would say find someone that you can shadow, find a practicing attorney that wants to give back and take the time to teach you, things so that you can figure out if it's right for you. I know some attorneys that were like, hey, residential real estate is going to be a great side hustle. It's going to be awesome. I'm going to make so much money. And they have no idea the headaches that can come along with some of the hoops you have to jump through. So yeah, I would say start reaching out to attorneys and really start to learn the ins and the outs of how real estate is done in Cook County and in the collar counties, because it's very, very, very important and will set you apart if you can display that knowledge, when you first start out, to either if you're going to go off on your own right away, or if you're going to go try and work for a firm. If you sit down and you say, hey, I took the time, I know the ins and outs of a full payment certificate, or what to do when there's zoning issues or property taxes. Condominium associations are another big one. That's huge. If you don't know those documents and you don't know what you're looking for or how to read a budget for an association, you could potentially misguide your client. So again, start learning all of that now so that you're not in the middle of a transaction trying to figure it out, because it's not going to go well.
You mentioned that, some attorneys try to do this as like a side business and they find that it's difficult because it sounds like a week is fairly malleable and how things can sort of ebb and flow. Do you have like a typical week or is it really, you can't really see any further out than a couple weeks, if you know what I mean?
So it certainly ebbs and flows. It depends on where all the files are at in their, I guess, like life cycle of the transaction. So right now, I mean, it's this like weird part of where a majority of my files, in fact, I would say all of them except for two maybe at this point, were out of attorney review. We're waiting for financing to come through. There's like a lull in activity. It's pretty quiet. But then I know for a fact, looking at my calendar, that on November 30th, we have 5 closings that day. So I know, and I have to account for the Thanksgiving holiday. So I know that week before, we're not going to have Thursday. We're not going to have Friday. We better start looking at our closings on November 30th. We should be looking at those a week to a week and a half before to know that we're all on track, that on November 30th, the 5 closings are going to go smoothly. So it ebbs and flows. Some weeks, if all of our files are in attorney review, it's a cluster. I mean, you've got emails coming in every which way. You're negotiating this, you're negotiating that. It's a lot. Then you kind of hit the lull and then you pick back up right before closing. So it depends on where all of the files are. And, I will say that planning is huge in this practice area. Like I said, I already know what November 30th is going to look like. Quite frankly, this week, I'm probably going to sit down and start to put together what everyone needs for closing ahead of time, because people are going to get distracted with the holiday. And I don't want to be the Wednesday, because let's face it, even the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, most people aren't going to be working. Some are going to work half a day. So I really have 2 days that week. So this week, actually, I will probably sit down and start figuring out, what does the end of the month look like? What does December look like? You have to be flexible. Yes, there's a lot that you can plan ahead of time, but then, yeah, there's a lot of audibles that come into play that last minute financing issues, last minute with the association. You gotta know how to prioritize what is an emergency that can wait until tomorrow and what's an emergency that needs to be handled right now. So prioritizing the problems and recognizing what can and can't wait is super important in this practice area for sure. Or you'll go crazy. You'll go crazy if every time a realtor or client calls you with an emergency, you think it's an emergency. Because I would say 8 times out of 10, it's something that can wait until the next day.
Then how do you delegate all of that pretty much? Like, because it can be overwhelming if you're handling literally every single line item.
Yep.
So how do you break that up? Is it as it comes, or do you have like that plan that you set out and then you do it from there?
So the great thing with this past year with hiring Daniel as an of-counsel attorney, and I set this expectation at the beginning before the clients even signed the engagement letter. I let the buyers and sellers and the realtors, everyone is aware of this, myself and the assistant handle the front end of the file. I am there to review the contract. She sends out the engagement letter. She'll enter dates in the calendar. She'll get things rolling. I handle attorney review. Daniel is the point of contact on closing day. Now, November 30th is going to be a little bit tricky. We're going to probably split that up. I'll probably take 3 closings. He'll probably take 2. But everybody is very well aware that on the day of closing, if you have issues, you contact Daniel first and he handles it. And if it's something, that I need to weigh in on because I'm copied on everything, if I see an email come through and I have to call Daniel and say, hey, listen, just an FYI, we got to handle it this way. I'll let you communicate. He communicates. So again, in terms of delegation, I find it difficult to relinquish control. I do my best. Daniel is phenomenal in handling closing day. But that is typically how it works. And two, for days like on November 30th, where, I've done 4 closings in a day. I've done back-to-back 4 closings in a day. They were all buyers and it was a very long day. Could I do it? Sure. But it's a disservice to my clients that I'm trying to juggle 3 or 4 other files while doing their closing. So, again, I recognize when things need to be delegated, and really the delegation comes more from, I don't want my clients to feel like I'm not focused on them because I'm dealing, at the 9 o'clock closing, I'm dealing with, problems for the 2 o'clock closing. It's just not fair to them. So that's how we try and handle it as best as we can.
And I'm looking at my list again here. But I actually had a question from earlier. You mentioned that you were at odds with your managing partner at your previous firm, just in how they approached clientele. Was this always a goal of yours to set up your own shop, or was that kind of like the switch turned on there?
Turned on there for
Okay.
sure. I definitely think I saw myself, getting into mid or large size firm, being, the real estate person for that firm, having a salary, having benefits. Like I definitely, and then once I saw, and there's, again, there's nothing bad or wrong about how he handled the files. He handled the files how he wanted to handle them. I just knew deep down inside that I wanted to do things differently. And I kind of realized I wasn't going to get the freedom to do that. And that's when I started to sit down and seriously say, okay, the only way I'm going to take control of this is if I start my own firm and if I have the ability to manage these files truly the way I want to, that reflects who I am as a person and as an attorney. So.
And did you meet with other folks who had their own law firm set up before you went on that venture, or kind of?
So yeah, and this actually, I was thinking about it this morning as I was getting ready. I'm like, I'm sure I'm going to ask, like, what's the biggest piece of advice, or, what's whatever. And your question leads me to that, which is absolutely 1,000%. Don't ever be afraid to collaborate with other attorneys in this practice area. I can't speak for other practice areas. What I can speak about is the collaboration with other real estate attorneys has saved me in more ways than one. When I first started out, I did talk to a couple of my friends who have small to medium-sized firms, and they were super helpful in, here's what you have to file with the Illinois Supreme Court. Here's how you get malpractice insurance. Here's how you even set up your website. I mean, there was so much in the beginning. A lot of it was reading and research and figuring it out. And then a lot was picking up the phone and saying, hey, I'm super confused. Where do I register this? How do I do this? And to be honest with you, that has continued to this day. There's a group chat that I'm a part of. It's, I don't know, there's probably like 4 of us, 5 of us on it. We're all solo practitioners. We're all residential real estate attorneys. A lot of times we're on opposite sides of the file. And our group chat is really just, if you pull title and on the title commitment, some weird exception comes up that you've never ever seen before, I'll put it in the group chat. I'll be like, has anybody ever seen this before? What did you do to clear this? How did you even fix this? And somebody inevitably will chime in and be like, yeah, I had that once a couple years ago. Here's how I handled it. Or even, hey, I'm running into this problem negotiating this on this file, and not breaking client confidentiality, but just saying, hey, how would you handle this? This is how I want to approach it, but I want to make sure there's not an alternative. Collaborating with other attorneys has by far been the best thing for me, for my firm, for my clients, and to not ever think that doesn't mean that you're not a good attorney, or that, you're not good at this practice area. There's a lot. I mean, it's 2020. So I've been in this industry for 10 years. I've been doing it as a real estate attorney for 3.5. Believe me, there are things that come up on these transactions that even I'm just like, I don't even know where to start. How do we even fix this? And again, calling other attorneys has been just absolutely phenomenal. And the older attorneys, they, I remember one of my really good friends, he's an attorney, does some real estate work. And I remember in the beginning, I felt so bad. I was calling him like 2 or 3 times a week to be like, okay, I think I know how to handle this, but I need you to tell me that I'm right. And he'd be like, you're right. It's fine. You're right. You're on the right track. And I remember apologizing to him one day. And I said, David, I'm so sorry. I feel like I'm harassing you. And he said, this is the life cycle of being an attorney. You go through, you're a newly appointed attorney and you don't know what the heck you're doing, and you're calling everybody to try and give you advice. And then that lessons and lessons and lessons over time. And then you become the attorney that other attorneys are calling you for advice. He's like, this is the life cycle. This is how we protect each other. This is how we give back. So.
Another question I meant to ask earlier, why did you actually make the pivot to law? Since you were already in the broker business, was that a longer term plan as well? Or was there a switch turned at that point too?
Being an attorney had always been something I had wanted. When I graduated from University of Illinois, I was young. I just moved to the city and somebody was like, hey, go get your real estate license. I was like, well, that sounds fun. And I did it and I really enjoyed it. And I really liked it. It was fun. You get to see all these amazing places. You meet all these amazing people. I mean, the clients I've met along the way, just, God, they're a cast of characters. It's great. But I never lost sight of wanting to go back to law school. I mean, I will be totally honest with you. When I went to law school, really wanted to ditch the whole real estate thing altogether. I wanted, I was like, oh, it was great, but I want to try family law, and I want to try criminal law, and I want to try this, and I want to try that. And I did. I worked for a family law attorney. I, met with a couple people at the state's attorney's office. And I explored it, but I always came back to real estate. So, that kind of, again, I tried to stray. I tried to get into something else, and it just, I came back to this.
And then does anyone else have any other questions? I'm all out on my list. I think that's a pretty good place to wrap up, unless someone has another question.
I'll ask one that's not too insightful.
Go for it.
Go ahead.
So I know you went to a law firm out of law school. Do you think it's feasible to go solo practice right out of law school? Because I know there's a lot of hurdles, like very obviously cost and things like that. But do you think that's a feasible thing?
Yes, absolutely, 100%. If you go into it with the mindset that it's going to be hard work and long days in the beginning, and you're going to be stressed out, and you're going to wonder where money is going to come in next month. And but I will say, I actually know definitely two very good friends from law school that they skipped the whole dealing with a firm, and they set out on their own right from the get-go. They run very successful practices now. And so, yeah, I absolutely think that it's possible, especially post-pandemic and where the legal field is, especially in transactional work. I think even now more so than ever, people are really getting away from the bigger law firms, and people really are going out on their own. And it's absolutely a far more acceptable route than I think it was 15 to 20 years ago. I mean, 15 to 20 years ago, I don't think you would have ever heard of anybody leaving law school and going out on their own right away. But I think it's far more prevalent now. And I will be totally honest with you, my stay with my firm was very short-lived. It was 6 months. So, I mean, I graduated law school, got the job with the firm, realized it wasn't for me, and within less than 6 months, I was out on my own. So it's very, very doable.
Last call for any more questions. I guess we'll call it a wrap there. Thank you very much, Sarah. That was very insightful, and I think very helpful for anyone who might be wanting to go towards the residential route, for sure.
Absolutely.
And would it be all right if I shared your contact information with the rest of the club?
Absolutely. Please, if anybody has any questions, feel free to always email me or call me, and I'm happy to either, give advice or support or, anything. Very, very happy to do it.
Fantastic. Well, thank you. A virtual round of applause for you, and thank you again. So everyone else, that concludes our webinar series this fall. I'll be sending out a scheduling doc for the spring in the next month or so we can set up our next round of webinars. But thank you very much, Sarah.
Okay. Bye, guys.